Randy Christian with the Essential Faith Project. In this podcast, I want to talk to you about one of the most important concepts in our faith. It could be argued it is the most important, and yet it is also one of the least understood and sometimes one of the most abused. This came back to me recently, and I'll give credit to my friend Dustin Jones, who is the lead pastor of the congregation that we are part of, Vantage Point. When he called me and said, hey, I want to talk to you a little bit about this sermon idea, a series idea I've got. And I want to talk about grace. And the first thing I thought, honestly, was, okay, well, it's obvious. I mean, grace is grace, and it's such a big deal in our faith. But on the other hand, it's also obvious. It took me all of about 15 seconds to realize or remember that grace is not that understood. And as Dustin kind of unfolded the ideas that he had, it just brought out more and more and more and more the reality that in the modern American church, grace is a concept that we hear about a lot and we understand almost none. I got my first taste of this my first year, actually my first month of full-time pastoral ministry. I was serving a church in Bellevue, Nebraska. I was 22 years old, had just come on staff as an associate minister. And as I was sitting in the office one day, I got a phone call, and it was from a guy who was a minister of a church in neighboring Iowa. We're right on the border of Nebraska and Iowa. And he says, hey, my dad is going to be going in for open heart surgery tomorrow. And he named the hospital, which was a huge hospital there in the area. Everybody knew it. And he says, I would love it. I can't get there in time, but I would love it if somebody could just go and pray with him. And then I will be there by the time he gets out of surgery. And I said, well, of course, I'd love to do that. I drove out to the hospital that next day and asked to speak with this man who was about the same age as I am now. And that's not something that had hit me until I started thinking about this. This is a man who had been with the Lord his whole life. He had literally been a Christian twice as long plus as I had been alive. And so I'm thinking, well, this is going to be fun. It's going to be easy. I'm going to be talking to this man who's had a wonderful life with the Lord, and then having the honor to pray with him, and everything's going to be great. When I got there, I asked to speak with him, and I caught them just as they were starting to wheel him into surgery. They stopped literally in the hallways, and when they found out who I was, and said, hey, take your time. We'd love to give you the chance to pray with him. And I introduced myself. I explained I'd gotten a call from his son and that I was there to pray with him. And I didn't get another word out before he literally grabbed my coat and said, please, please pray that God would forgive me. Please pray that he'll forgive me. Please pray that he'll forgive my sins. And he just kept saying that and saying it. I finally calmed him down a bit and said, of course, let's pray. But what hit me about this is a man who had been a Christian literally about 60 years. And in all that time, apparently had not understood at a level that integrated into his life the idea of grace. He was ready to go into surgery and was scared to death because of the idea that maybe there was a sin he had not caught, he had not repented of, or that was so big that God had not forgiven, and that he might die in surgery and not be saved. It blew my mind. It was something that I've literally struggled with ever since then, and that was 1979, January of 1979. So as I approach this subject, I've got that in mind. I've got one other story in mind a good friend of mine named Ty Winston, who was the youth minister. Most of the time I was raising my kids in Beaverton, Oregon, and serving on staff with him as an associate minister. Ty was a bit older than me and had grown up in the church. This is something, by the way, that is a trend that you should be catching, because I didn't. And that's one of the reasons why this has been a different experience for me. And one day, Ty came to me and he said, you know something? I am learning about grace. Now, he had a Bible college degree. He'd been in ministry 25 years. And I'm sitting there looking at him thinking, what do you mean you're learning about grace? Where have you been? But what he said was, all these years, I've heard the word, but I never understood it. And I never felt the comfort of grace in my life. I've always felt like I had to just work a little harder, try a little harder, be a better preacher, a better minister, because I needed to please God so that he would accept me. And I'm beginning to realize grace. Again, I was dumbfounded. Now, this is 25 years later, but the two situations are joined. And here's how. Both of these men, number one, were immersed in the church. I mean, it was their lives in one way or the other. Number two, both had grown up in the church. And number three, both had never experienced heartfelt teaching about grace from a biblical perspective. And that absolutely blew my mind. So what I want to do in this podcast is to just talk to you a little bit about this idea, this concept of grace as it's presented in the New Testament, and hopefully dispel some myths and set us all on a path that should comfort us, encourage us, and strengthen our link to Jesus himself, our devotion to him, not because we need to do it to please him, but because he has already done it, and we are simply responding to what he's done. First thing we need to do is understand, well, what in the world does this mean? What is grace? Grace is the Greek word charis. It comes into English as either X-A-R-I-S or C-H-A-R-I-S. And it's the word we find in Ephesians 2, where Paul says we are saved by grace through faith, not of works, not of things we do, lest anybody should brag about it. And emphasizing that, no, our salvation is from God. It's what God has done. None of us earns it. None of us is capable of earning it in any way, shape, or form. We simply receive it through faith. So grace is God's part, and faith is ours. The reason that's so important is because what it basically says is 2,000 years ago, they had this same issue that we do today, understanding and accepting grace. They were, of course, from a Jewish perspective, and even those in the Gentile world, were all used to the idea of trying to please God, or for the Gentiles, their gods, and somehow make them happy with them so that they would forgive them, they would provide what they need. That's not what grace is about. Grace literally means gift. That's what the word means, is a gift. It's one of a couple of words that's used in the New Testament, and it simply means gift, and a gift that has no price to it. Okay, so gift, you would think, automatically means something that's given, not earned. But grace is a word that just sort of reinforces that what grace is given to us and what comes with that grace is not something we could ever earn. And yet we find people, particularly people who have grown up in the church, trying over and over and over and over. And this isn't just the more legalistic denominations. This is kind of across the board. My master's degree is from a Jesuit university, the theology department of that university. And I was privileged, and by the way, I was accepted unbelievably, and it was just a wonderful experience to study with these people who very much valued my experience and my perspective as somebody who was not from the same background as them. But the thing that I learned is that for many, many, many people who call themselves Christians, notably the Roman Catholics, but others as well, grace is seen as an economy. It's something that you not only earn or at least do things for, but it piles up so that you get more grace and more grace and more. And the more you get, the better off you are in terms of God's eyes, forgiveness, and so forth. That could not be further from the truth biblically. There is no such teaching. There is no such concept. Grace is not something that we ever earn, and it's not an economy. It's not something where we gain more and then we use it up in some way, and then we need more in order to be forgiven or to be liked better or whatever. Grace is gift. And failure to understand this and failure to accept this is basically looking God in the eye and saying, I don't believe you, and I don't think you're that good. Because God says it's grace. It's a gift. What I give you. We're saved. We're forgiven. It's a gift. Here, it's yours. Not only do you not have to earn it, you can't earn it. But I give it to you anyway. And by the way, it was very costly to him, but not to us. But what we do is we tend to say, okay, I hear that, but it can't really be real. And so I know that really I've got to try to please God somehow. And then we proceed to try to do that. And we forget that what we're doing is basically calling him a liar if we do that. So this becomes very important. Our faith is determined by our perspective of God, not by who he is, because who he is it's always the same. He never changes. But different people have different faith and different levels of faith, different weaknesses of faith, because our perspectives of who God is are so different. If I see God as loving, then I'm going to have a certain kind of relationship with him. But if I see him as kind of a cosmic accountant, as a bank person who says, okay, you owe this much, you've accumulated this much, but you need to get more. If I see him that way, then I'm going to be like that guy who was laying in the hospital bed, headed for surgery and scared to death. His faith gave him no comfort at all. Rather, it scared him. Or my friend who all those years said, I never understood that. And by the way, I feel comfortable saying that because he publicly said this in his teaching. So I'm not telling a story behind his back there. That's the basic of grace. Now, we need to understand that grace is not just about forgiving us, giving us salvation, but grace is also how we live. And this is the thing that Dustin, my lead pastor, what he was really focusing on in our first discussion, that people don't get, that what gets us through hard times is God's grace. Not earned. That's going to do the opposite, because we go into hard times and then we think we've got to do better even, and we just go down this spiral. But instead realizing God is faithful and God has already given us so much. But we've got an example of this in 2 Corinthians when Paul says, I had this experience and I have this, and he refers to it as a thorn in the flesh. Now, people have been debating for literally almost 2,000 years. What exactly was that? Was it literally a thorn? Probably not, because they had ways of removing them. So instead, was it something that acts like a thorn? It gets in and it just nags at you and it hurts and it bothers you constantly and it just doesn't stop. Could it have been, some say his eyesight, some say his personality, some say it was the fact that he was called to the Gentiles from being a Pharisee, which enraged the Pharisees, Jews, and created a problem between him and Jews that followed him the rest of his life. Some present other possibilities. We don't know. And I think that's important, because if God wanted us to know, I mean, it was right there. All he would have had to do is add one little sentence and bang, we know. But he didn't do that. And I think it's because we have this tendency to compare pain. Well, mine isn't as bad as yours, or mine is way worse than yours. And the reality is we can't do that. Our experiences are subjective. And so what God did is he just left that and allowed us to understand a basic principle, which was not about what's the thorn. It was about what Jesus said. Because Paul says, I asked and I asked, remove this from me. And Jesus said no. And finally, Jesus said, my grace, same word, is sufficient for you. In other words, the way you get through your weakness, and that was, by the way, the next thing he said, is my strength is perfected, is completed in your weakness. So no, I'm not going to remove the thorn, because it is performing a function. It's not about, I'm not happy with you, I don't love you, I'm not being faithful. It's about, this is what's best for you, because your faith is going to grow and you're going to understand that my grace is sufficient. It's enough. You don't need anything else. And apparently Paul learned that lesson, because he recorded it so that the Corinthians could learn that lesson, and all the way down to us learning the same thing. So grace is about salvation, but it's also about sustaining us as we go through life as fallen creatures, experiencing the results of our own sin and other people's sin. And I've got to tell you, I've been through some very difficult things, and it's true. Nothing we do, just like salvation, nothing we do is going to accomplish what we need. But what God has done and already given us, that sustains us. But we also need to remember that grace is connected to some other things. For example, grace also helps to equip us, right? So we talk about spiritual gifts a lot. Did you know that the word spiritual gift does not exist in the New Testament? I mean, it does in English translations, because we've made it up and inserted it. But in the Greek, there is no such word. Instead, there's two words, and one of them is spirit things, and the other is, and this is the one that we all know because it comes into English as transliterated. We don't translate it, we just give it English letters. Charisma, or charismatic. Okay? Well, charisma is the singular. Charismata is the plural. And what it means in Greek is very simple. Grace stuff, or grace things. So the ta, or the mata for plural, is just stuff or things added to grace. All of these spiritual gifts, or what we call spiritual gifts, are just grace things. They're just gift stuff. The very same word. So God gives these to us, not for our benefit, but for the benefit of others, for the benefit of the body of Christ in general. But we do get the benefit of being able to serve more effectively, because he's given us these things. And I've experienced through my life that when I'm serving even a little more effectively, I know it. And it just gives me power. It gives me joy. It fuels me. And I don't believe I'm different than anybody else. So we've got salvation, we've got sustaining us through times of trouble. We've also got equipping us by giving us things that help us to serve him and serve the church. And there is one other word, there's others, but these are the big ones, that it also has to do with our attitude. Excuse me. And that, in fact, has to do with what that old phrase, an attitude of gratitude. Because the word for gratitude or thanksgiving in Greek is good grace. Eucharisto. We get the English word, again, just English letters to the Greek word, Eucharist, from that. And we apply it to not only saying thank you, giving thanksgiving, but to what became known, as well as other things, as the Thanksgiving meal, which was the Lord's Supper. Because as we remember his sacrifice, we give thanks for it. Grace permeates all of these things, and frankly, every other aspect of our life as a Christian. If we understand that, then we don't wonder how we can make God love us. When we're going through hard times, and I get them, I get it. When we're going through hard times, we don't ask, why me? I mean, we might in a time of weakness, but we come back and say, Lord, I know you love me. I know you care. I know you have a plan to grow me, Hebrews 12, to produce righteousness and peace through what's going on. So I just have to trust you, believe in you, have faith. Because remember, the way grace is received, we hear this in Ephesians 2, through faith. So all of these things that happen in our lives, when we're experiencing problems, when we're not experiencing success in serving him or joy in serving him, when we don't have that gratitude that we should have constantly because of what he's done, then we come back and we look at first who he is, and the fact that who he is determined what he gives us, which is the gifts, the grace. And when he gives us those things, when he gives us grace, that we now can respond to him in faith and see our faith grow. And it's okay to say, well, I'm not there. That's just not where I am. I experience these things and I struggle with every one of these. That's fine. That's like the guy in Mark who said, I believe, but help me in my unbelief. Literally, I believe, but help me in my not faith. I have faith, help me in my not faith. And he will, because that's part of the grace. See, this is all about him. It's not about us. It's not about how good we are, how faithful we are, how much we've done for him. It's about him. And we have to believe him, and we have to trust him, and then, to the best of our ability, live consistent with that. That set of responses is faith. Anyone who wants to be a disciple of Jesus needs to understand grace, the gift of God, and faith, the way we receive that gift. Hi, I hope this was useful to you. I want to encourage you to go a little bit further by clicking on the links that are supplied to you in the info section of this YouTube video. One of them will take you straight to the spiritual health assessment. We encourage you to sign up for that, take this assessment, and follow the recommendations of the report so that you can be strengthened in your own spiritual health. This is 100% donation supported, so we encourage you, if the Lord has blessed you, to also go to www.essentialfaithproject.org/donate in order to make a donation one time or on an ongoing basis, a repeat basis. We would love to be supported that way. More important, however, would be for you to just click on the subscribe button and tell others of the resource that's available so that together we can follow our Lord more faithfully.